I'm going to discuss how we develop this plan. We know we have to do it. We know there's different types of workplace violence incidents, but okay, now what do I do? What's the first step? Well, the first step is, do you have an injury and illness prevention program? As a reminder, generally all California employers are required to have one. There are some very limited exceptions, but for the most part, most of the employers here are going to need one. So if you don't already have one, that's a good place to start. Cal OSHA has a model. Cal OSHA's website has some information on that, as well as we'll discuss it a little bit here. But as Anthony mentioned, our focus here is going to be the workplace violence prevention plan. So the first thing you want to do is you want to download and save the model workplace violence prevention plan. This is a model that has been provided and developed by Cal OSHA. It includes all of this information that we are going to go over today, and it allows the employer to sit down, figure out what information they need, and plug that right in. This plan can be a standalone document, it can be a separate prevention plan, or you can add it on to your injury and illness prevention program. So if you already have one, you can add it to the end of that. Or if you don't already have one, you can develop both of these at the same time. The first thing that you want to do is you want to identify the individual or the individuals who are going to be responsible for implementing this plan. You can have more than one person responsible, but as you'll see on the plan, you will need to identify exactly who is, what role they have and what their specific titles are. And you may want to use the same individual that's responsible for your injury and illness prevention program, your IIPPs, because there is a lot of overlapping information. So there are 12 key components that I'm going to go over that need to be in your prevention plan. These are, again, all on the model or the Cal OSHA model plan, and they outline exactly what information you need to put in there. So the first one is responsibility. And this is what I discussed earlier. It's the name and the title of the persons responsible for implementing the plan. And here you can see the plan itself has a box ready for you to fill in, identifying the person who's responsible, what their job title is, what specific responsibility they have, and their contact information. Again, you can identify multiple people, but you do need to fill out that column that talks about their responsibilities. What specific responsibilities do they have? The second element is that your employees need to have an active involvement in your plan. So what procedures are you going to put in place to ensure that there's active involvement in developing and implementing this plan? So will you have ongoing safety meetings? What's going to be addressed at these meetings? How can employees submit suggestions for training? And how will employees submit reports of workplace violence incidents, including who they report it to, who will handle the investigation? The third element is to ensure that all employees, and that doesn't just include your supervisory employees, this includes your non-supervisory employees, will comply with the plan, including procedures to ensure that there is a prohibition against retaliation against employees who report workplace violence. So you may want to determine what steps you're going to take to ensure that the employees are complying, whether you need to retrain employees that have deficient safety performance, whether employees who violate or do not comply with the plan are going to be disciplined, and whether you may want to reward or highlight employees who have exceptional safety performance. The fourth item is communication with your employees. How are you going to communicate with your employees? How can employees communicate information to the employer? Is there going to be a cell phone alert? Do you have an email communication? Is there an alarm in the workplace that will ring in the event of a specific workplace violence? And as a reminder, you do not want to prevent your employees from accessing their cell phones to seek emergency assistance. And in fact, employers are prohibited from enforcing personal cell phone policies if the device is being used during an emergency condition for safety reasons. So you can have your cell phone policies preventing employees from using their personal cell phones, but if there is an emergency condition, that needs to be carved out as an exception. The fifth element here is employee compliance. A coordination with other employers. What are the methods that the employer is going to use to coordinate the implementation of the plan with other employers? So for example, if you're in a work site that has multiple employers, you're in a building that has different offices, how will you coordinate with those other employers to ensure that these plans are in place? Perhaps your evacuation plan needs to be coordinated with your building, which staircase employees need to use in the case of an evacuation or any other violence incident. The sixth element is workplace violence incident reporting procedure. How are employers going to accept and respond to reports of workplace violence? How does the employee report it? Who does the employee report it to? And similar to when employees report incidents of harassment or unlawful conduct in the workplace, you want to provide alternatives. You want to allow the employee options of people that they can go to and report this workplace violence incident to. There is no requirement to have a system in place that employees can submit incidents anonymously. However, that may be a good practice to have. In certain incidents, an employee may feel more comfortable reporting something anonymously rather than with their name. The seventh element is what are the protocols for emergency situations, including communicating with emergency contacts. So how is the employer going to alert employees in an emergency situation? What are the procedures for evacuation or for sheltering in place? How can employees contact staff, security personnel, or law enforcement? Who is the emergency contact for the employer? What if your work site doesn't have cell phone service? What if you're in an area that, the cell phones just don't work great? What procedure can employees use to contact emergency personnel? Is there a landline that employees can use? These are the type of things you want to consider when identifying your emergency response procedure. The eighth element is identifying your workplace hazards and evaluation. Now, this is something that is going to be ongoing, and it's something that you will be doing on a yearly and periodic basis. But this is a place where to start. At the beginning, when you are developing your plan, you want to conduct a risk assessment to identify potential hazards. Things you may want to consider: is there adequate lighting? Do your employees need to take out the trash at the end of their shift, and is the alleyway really dark? That may be something you need to consider. Maybe you want to implement a buddy system so employees aren't going out by themselves. Are there video surveillance? Is there alarms? Are there locks? Where can employees go in the case of an emergency? And are employees trained on how to de-escalate violent or potentially threatening situation? So you want to have a procedure set up that on the outset on how you're going to identify these hazards, and you're also going to want to identify when you're going to continue to do these evaluations. Are you going to have periodic inspections? Who is going to conduct these inspections? Are you going to be testing, if there's an area that maybe there's not adequate lighting, is somebody going to be testing it every 6 months to make sure the light bulb is working, or every year to make sure that your alarms are in working condition? Number 9 is the correction. So this is the procedure on how to correct those hazards. So how are you going to do that? What actions are going to be taken? What if there's an imminent workplace hazard? What steps will be taken there? In the case of a hazard that can be immediately corrected versus a hazard that cannot immediately be corrected. So you want to identify some of the corrective measures specific to this workplace. We talked about some examples, but some additional examples may be limiting cash on the premises, or having certain areas that are controlled access for employees only. You also may want to establish and enforce workplace safety policies if you don't already have one, such as a no weapons policy. The 10th element is procedures for post-incident response and investigation. So what happens after a violent incident occurs? How are you going to be doing that investigation? who's going to be filling out the log, what documents will you be reviewing, who's going to be interviewed, and again, who is going to record the incident on that violence incident log. Number 11, you want to identify in your plan who is going to be trained, which is everybody, your managers, your supervisors, all your employees. When they're going to be trained, they need to be trained on there's very specific requirements of when they need to be trained on a yearly basis, again, after additional hazards are identified, and also when there's a violence incident, and what items are going to be included in the training. And finally, your plan needs to include a procedure for reviewing and revising the workplace prevention plan. So you need to be reviewing this plan to make sure it's being effective, revising it as needed. At minimum, every year when you're doing your training is a great time to review the plan, make sure that everything is in there. If you find a new deficiency, if there's a new workplace violence incident, when you're doing that training again, review, revise the plan, add in those additional hazards you've identified, add in the new corrective measures that have been added into your into the next steps.